mechanisms that would ensure that we create a reality that will give the Palestinians hope and give them their rights, and also give Israel confidence that it is going to be secure and it is accepted. So I know there's been a lot of focus on the day after of Gaza, but you cannot talk about the day after in Gaza outside a comprehensive approach that talks about the day after in the whole of the occupied Palestinian territories and the whole region.
Foreign Minister Shoukry.
Well, again, the matter is speculative, and there are many moving parts, and without definition of the parameters and what exactly will be the situation and the conditions that will arise when there's a ceasefire, when there's a possibility to address the comprehensive nature of the conflict. Let's not forget that this is the fifth conflict between Hamas and Israel. On every occasion, there were efforts to regain tranquility, to have some form of understanding, which held up for a very limited period of time until there was another incident of provocation or of retaliation, and we found ourselves repeating the same without learning from our previous lessons. This, of course, is much graver in its consequences, in its dimensions, but we cannot approach it from the same perspective of dealing solely and exclusively with the conditions of Gaza, especially since we don't know the contours of what the Israeli decision will be, whether it will engage on a more comprehensive, more durable, more consistent position as reflected in the consensus of the international community.
When you engage...
on the issue of course, we're willing to play our role fully for whatever it takes, but that role and what we will expend in terms of risks and rewards will be subject to the overall evaluation of the end result and whether it is consistent with our aims. Our aims is the establishment of a Palestinian state and the end of the conflict. So without the, as my colleagues have mentioned, without the overall comprehensive horizon, I think it's premature to discuss at this current stage, and without what I started with, which is the determination and the commitment and the declaration of the most impactful members of the international community of their willingness to not only from a rhetoric perspective say that they are in favor of a comprehensive solutions, but are willing to undertake the tangible measures to bring it about. As I mentioned, we have the mechanisms, but is there the political will to utilize it? Is there political will to bring the leverage necessary on all sides? And all sides will have to show moderation, show responsibility, and be willing. But if it is addressed from the ideological, radical perspective, then I think we are only doomed to fail.
Well, you know, Egypt's had a lot of, obviously, experience with Gaza and with Hamas. I want to ask you that question I asked Foreign Minister Safadi, which is, what does, though, happen to Hamas, okay? I mean, do they melt away? Do they join the PLO? Do they accept Oslo? I mean, that's not a small question here.
It's a legitimate question, but I think Minister Safadi has answered it. The justification of Hamas has continued to be the resistance to the occupation. If you detract that, if you provide the implementation of a two-state solution, and there have been declarations by some of the leadership of Hamas that they would relinquish the armed struggle if there was a clear commitment to establish a Palestinian state. But certainly the struggle, the actions would necessarily desist from resistance, and let us not forget that resistance of a people towards an occupying power is a principle enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. So as long as there is an occupation, there will always be a justification for resisting that occupation within international law and within the full respect of international humanitarian law. So This is a evolutionary process, but again, we have to put in place the conditions for which Hamas becomes a partner in the process, a participant in the creation of the Palestinian state, and within the context of the constituents, which are the Palestinians. They have to define what role will Hamas undertake.
Professor Kuok, let's take the other side of your perspective now. There's been a lot of global competition over this region. You referred to China mediating between Saudi Arabia and Iran, its relationship with Iran. The United States, our goal is obviously to get China's influence as much out of this region as possible. The countries in the region have tried to stay as neutral as possible in a lot of that. Talk about that dynamic to us.
Well, I think it's fair to say that with increasing geopolitical competition, countries apart from the United States and China in all regions of the world have been facing an increasing pressure not to choose sides, not to have to pick the United States or China, to have, I guess, one's cake and eat it too. And the US and China have sought at various points to make clear that they're not actually forcing countries to choose sides. But if we look at, say, the debate around the 5G and what countries should be picking, I think that demonstrates the sort of pressures that are put to bear on countries, regardless of what.
Talk about that in a little more specifics around Huawei and that debate.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you explain that? Just talk about it a little bit.
Well, I think that kind of shows that, you know, when push comes to shove, there will have to be a decision that's made, as much as you want to avoid as much as possible making a decision. But I think, you know, at least in my part of the world, countries have sought to carve out strategic space for itself in one of three main ways. The first one is to sort of to seek to work more closely within the region and through the Association of Southeast Asian Nation States, so Southeast Asian countries, and you know, really work collectively and cohesively as a region. Two, they have sought to increase their strategic and economic engagement with other parts of the world. So, for instance, yesterday we heard the Prime Minister of Malaysia talk about the ideational and aspirational role that Saudi Arabia plays for many countries in Muslim majority countries in Southeast Asia. But I think, you know, you'll see countries, regardless of whether or not they're Muslim majority or not in my part of the world, look to increase economic and strategic engagement with the Middle East as it seeks to increase their choice of strategic and economic partners. And finally, and I think this is really important, I think what Southeast Asia has sought to do, sometimes successfully and sometimes less so, is to focus on the importance of the rule of law in this climate. And that's important because, first, it defends against incursions against sovereignty and sovereign rights. Second, it helps also to push back against any economic or military coercion. And third, I think that focus on the rule of law is really important because it allows countries in the region to frame their choice as not as, you know, the US or China, but a decision made to support the rule of law. And I think in that respect, it seeks to carve out strategic autonomy for itself. And so if we bring that back to the context of the Middle East, and again, you know, I come to the region as an outsider, but I think that raises several questions for the Middle East. First, what is this crisis doing to the regional cohesion and its ability to manage and navigate great power competition? Second, how can it seek to carve out greater strategic autonomy for itself beyond the United States and China? So I understand that, you know, China is an important economic player in the region, but you know, I think countries realize that, you know, you cannot put all your eggs in one basket. And so how can you increase strategic autonomy by engaging more with other parts of the world strategically and economically? And finally, and I think this is really important, is while refusing to take a side is sometimes understandable and even a smart option in terms of, you know, creating opportunities for yourself, etc. Is it truly defensible? Can it be is it defensible when the position a country takes means the erosion of the rule of law? Because the erosion of the rule of, the rule of law is, in a sense, what protects a country's sovereignty, it protects its strategic autonomy, and I think it's the only, or an important foundation at the very least, foundation upon which peace and long-term stability and prosperity can be built. So without the rule of law, I think we would see a very unstable world. And I think, as much as countries want to maintain their options, I think those options should not be preserved at the expense of the rule of law, which protects all countries, small or large alike. So I think I would just raise those questions for the consideration of countries in the Middle East, recognizing, of course, that I do not come from here.
Thank you. Just one quick more round, and I know you guys actually have serious negotiations, not this pretend one I'm trying to conduct here. Iran. What role is it playing? Can the kind of resolution we're talking about here, will Iran let it come together?
Will it? Shouldn't be a question. It's up to us to make the right thing happen. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, we all know what the right thing is. The right thing is the rights of the Palestinian people, the aspirations of the Palestinian people for self-determination should be fulfilled. And through fulfilling that, we can ensure that a struggle that has lasted for many decades will be concluded and will allow a lot of the opportunities that were just mentioned about integration, which will also foster our region's independence.
That would neutralize Iran in a way if that happened, yeah.
It would possibly neutralize Iran, but it will also offer opportunities for Iran. It will be then up to Iran and all other actors who don't believe in these things to make a choice, because the economic opportunities, the developmental opportunities that are presented by peace, by security, by cooperation are tremendous. And the question will be then, do you integrate yourself into that, or do you try to be a spoiler? And the thing is, if we are all focused on the right path, on the path of justice for the Palestinians, and in tandem with that, the path of cooperation and integration, it will insulate us from an attempt to disrupt the region. I think that choice is a very important choice to make, and I suspect that Iran and others will look at it very, very seriously, and they will have to make that choice. And I can only hope that they will join in such a pathway towards a much better, much more integrated region. I'll note that Iran has for many years championed the idea of regional interdependence and the region looking after its own security. So this is actually what this opportunity presents. Yeah. And then it will be up to them to either stand by the rhetoric they've occupied. If we say the Palestinian state is here, which is one of the raison d'etre that they've used consistently, and the idea of regional cooperation is also here. So, this is a situation where we can all prosper and move forward together.
For Mr. Safadi, I want to, if you want to address that, but also a different question related, which is, it's clear that an effective, credible, non-corrupt, legitimate PA is a keystone for everything here. What kind of changes do we need in the PA to be able to play that role of filling the vacuum in Gaza? And what can all three of these countries do to help them, achieve that capability?
If I may first, Tom, just address the Iran issue. And I think we have too many conflicts in the region. None of us want more conflict. Obviously, none of us want a conflict with Iran. But in order for us to have good neighborly relations with Iran, there are some Iranian policies that have to do with our own security and intervention in our affairs that have to stop. And there are ongoing conversations with the Iranian to make sure that we get to that. The other side is the Iran-Israel kind of situation, and our position in Jordan has always been solve the Palestinian issue, and then anybody from outside will have no reason to interfere. If you give the Palestinians their state and their freedom, and they will be the first to tell Iran, stay out of our business, and Iran will then have no reason to interfere, and then we'll all be able to say, we don't want any more trouble in our region, we want peace and security. We lived the danger of an escalation not too long ago. We were in the crossfire in Jordan, and we made it unequivocally clear to both Iran and Israel that Jordan will not be a battleground for you, and that anybody who violates our security and endanger the livelihoods of our people, we will stand up to them to the extent that we can.
Yeah.
So I think, and that just speaks to the danger inherent in failing to, again, solve the conflict and allow for escalation, because that will just bring all of us to more trouble and more conflict. On the Palestinian issue, look, I mean...
The PA issue, yeah.
PA,
yeah.
The PA was created out of Oslo in 1993, and the PA was created as a temporary agency for 5 years, which should have then transited to what would have been a Palestinian state. The PNA was created to offer its people two things: better lives and freedom. It could deliver on nothing. Now, obviously, it has to do a lot of its internal work as well, but the other flip of the coin is that Israel did not provide the conditions conducive for the PA to be able to move forward. So the loss of credibility by the PNA is also greatly due to the fact that Israel did not honor Oslo. On the contrary, it went on with creating hurdles to it being able to serve its people and serve the cause of peace. And just one example, Tom, I mean, both Sameh and I, Minister Shoukry and I were in the room in February of last year when we started the Aqaba Sharm process, and we started the Aqaba Sharm process at the time with the hope of creating a pause of 6 months during which we'll have some confidence-building measures that would take us to engagement on political horizon. The Israelis in Aqaba, and then a month later in Sharm el-Sheikh, signed to a number of commitments, and the U.S. was in the room, and the Palestinians were there as well, and nothing was implemented. So now I think ultimately elections will have to be the answer that the Palestinians themselves they want to do, but in order to have elections, you have to have conditions conducive for elections. That's not there too. We have a new Palestinian government now, and we've been all of us engaging to see how we can help. And the new Palestinian government has asserted that it will be independent, transparent, that will ensure good governance system, and that must happen not just to convince the world, but to convince the Palestinians as well, and to be able to serve the Palestinians better. But if you bring the best government on earth, and you entrust it with running the affairs of the Palestinians on the West Bank now, in the current conditions where economy is suffocated, security operations into Palestinian cities and towns, settlement growth and settler terrorism, confiscation of land, no economic horizon, no political horizon, they're doomed to failure. So the challenge in all of us, and we're engaged in that conversation amongst ourselves, also with our partners in Europe and the United States, how do we enable the PA, and how do we enable an environment conducive for the success of the PA? Of course, when it comes to Gaza, it's a different beast. There are lots of other requirements that we touched upon that need to be there. But ultimately, everything's interconnected. We have to, again, go back to the drawing board. What is it that we want? We want a just and lasting and comprehensive peace. What is the path? I mean, what will achieve that peace? The two-state solution. Why are we not having the two-state solution? Because we have an Israeli government that says no to the two-state solution. We in the Arab world are offering, again, we have a goal, we're offering a plan, we're ready to engage with all our partners to make sure that we go to that end game, which will bring peace and security to Palestinian Israelis. But the one question that I would ask, and I'd like you to ask, is if we come up with the best plan ever, and all of us in the international community agree that this is the plan to go forward, and then Netanyahu and his government say no, what happens then? Will he face consequences? Because if he does not, he's going to continue with more of the same. So I think we really have to call a spade and say the party that is responsible for denying Palestinians, Israelis, the whole region peace must be held accountable, and all of us must come together to prevent it from dooming the future to conflict. And this is the quintessential question that we have not yet seen any answer to. And if we don't answer that, I think we'll be moving in the same cycle, and that would be an environment conducive to more violence, more conflict. And the amount of dehumanization and hatred that has come out of this latest round of confrontation, of the aggression on Gaza and all, is beyond description. And I think one challenge we all need to think about is how do we navigate around that? once the guns go silent, and they will go silent. And we cannot navigate around that unless, again, we offer that big move, that transformative move that convince people that ultimately, finally, after 30 years of negotiations, the end game is near, and we're about to get there.
For Mr. Shoukry.
Well, on the issue of Iran, I think we have to look at the historical context of the region, a region that has been plagued since World War II with a great deal of turbulence, starting with the legacy of colonialism, subsequently the Palestinian issue, the rise of fundamentalism, the Islamic State and its effects, the policies of regime change, the 20-year presence of foreign forces in Iraq. And all of this has been compounded by a sense of antagonism, revenge, hatred, and a cycle of violence. And all of this has an impact. And I think primarily the principles that were enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, which we all advocate, but do not necessarily interpret into policies, and the polarization that has occurred more recently with Ukraine and the Russian-Western divide have all added to the complexities and compounded the difficulties, and thereby the application also of the rule-based order and applying it consistently and devoid of double standards is necessary to create the environment. If the environment exists where there are a solution to the conflicts, and with the Palestinian issue being at the core of whether rightly or as a pretext, but we have to take it into account. A lot of the fundamentalism has utilized the Palestinian issue, and we see that when push comes to shove, it does not really support the Palestinians in the way that was projected on many occasions. So again, it is the resolution of those issues, a coalition to defeat the ideologies, radical ideologies, wherever they may exist, and an application without double standards, without an effort to project you're either with us or against us, so that we can address the needs of our people, address within cooperation, while maintaining sovereignty and while maintaining our ability to move forward without the infringement and without the expansionism that has been, unfortunately, a constant during these last 40, 50 years.
Professor Kuok, on the Iran question, it's sort of that mid-sized power. You talked about the states here staying neutral in the great power game. You talked about the great powers, coming into the region. Iran's right in the middle there. How do you see it? Its role in this?
Well, it's not something that I look very closely at, but I think it's clear that Iran, like the other countries in the region, have an incentive to move beyond the sort of the quicksand that it has been in for like decades. And I think there's so much potential in that country, and certainly it should be seeking to move beyond that. The question, though, is about incentives and what can be put on the table for them to feel incentivized to move towards the future that I think every country in the Middle East looks forward to. I think when I was in school, I think my image of the Middle East was a very different image from what I see today, right? So when I thought about the Middle East, I saw on the news, it was the conflict, it was the war. And in fact, my desire to study international relations for my master's was because I wanted to understand how countries could be in conflict for so many years without resolution. Surely it couldn't be that difficult. But then I think as we moved along, as the region moved along, it was progressive. there was tremendous economic development, and so a very different image of the Middle East emerged. And of course, Iran would be a part of that different picture of the Middle East. And now I think it's, I guess, the fork in the road for the region and for the world as well, because as I mentioned earlier, you know, what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East, and it has the ability to destabilize the globe as well. And, you know, like going back to the poll I mentioned earlier, the Middle East crisis, Palestine and Israel, has been ranked in my region as the single most important geopolitical conflict for the region, beyond even, say, the South China Sea, which is a flashpoint in the region. So I think Iran should want what's best for the region because it's best for itself as well.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank all our panelists. I have to excuse particularly the 3 foreign ministers. They actually have to go work on actually resolving this conflict right now. Thank all of you for being here, and thank you all for staying.